I didn't catch her in the act. I caught the moment my place in my own life quietly disappeared. It started with a small decision she made without me, then another. Until one night, standing in a hotel hallway, I realized this wasn't about betrayal alone. It was about being erased while still paying the bill. If you've ever stayed silent to keep the peace, you might already know where this story is going. Morning always started early in our house. Coffee brewed before sunrise, emails checked before my son came down the stairs, keys laid out on the counter in the same place every day. Routine kept things moving. At work, people expected decisions, clarity, follow-through. At home, I tried to offer the same steadiness, even when no one asked for it out loud. Chicago traffic was already thick by the time I reached the office. A contractor issue waited on my desk, along with a budget approval that needed my signature. I handled both without much thought. That part of life made sense. Problems came with boundaries. Solutions stayed within lines. Home didn't work that way anymore. That evening, my wife mentioned a new consulting trip while clearing the table. Atlanta. 3 days. She said it casually, like it had already been decided because, in her mind, it had. I booked it for next week, she said. Booked what? I asked. She didn't look up. Plates stacked, water running. The flight, hotel too. It made more sense to handle it quickly. No pause, no question, just a statement wrapped in efficiency. Something tightened in my chest, then loosened again as fast as it came. I told myself it wasn't worth turning into an argument. The kids were still nearby. Peace mattered more than precision. Later, after homework checks and quiet goodnights, I reviewed our shared account. A new expense stood out. Not huge, not alarming, just unfamiliar. I knew the vendor name. I hadn't approved it. "Did you sign the consulting addendum?" I asked, holding my phone up. She glanced once. "Yeah, it was time sensitive. You've been busy." That was new too. Busy had become shorthand for unnecessary. I wanted to say something sharper, wanted to point out that my name still carried the liability. Instead, I nodded. Years of smoothing things over had taught me how to swallow words before they turned solid. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The house hummed with ordinary sounds. Refrigerator, distant siren. The kind of calm that used to mean safety. A memory surfaced without warning. My father standing in the doorway when I was a kid, jacket still on, listening while decisions were made around him. No one asked his opinion either. He stayed quiet, told himself it was easier that way. I remembered promising myself I'd never become invisible in my own house. I closed the laptop. The next few days followed the same pattern. Small choices made without me. A meeting scheduled over a family commitment. A conversation cut short with a hand wave and a later. Each moment alone felt harmless. Together, they formed a shape I didn't like looking at. On Friday afternoon, she mentioned the hotel again. Different one this time. "I switched places," she said, "closer to downtown." "When were you going to tell me?" She shrugged. "I just did." That shrug landed harder than any raised voice. Dismissal didn't need volume. I thought about the contracts I managed at work. Every clause existed for a reason. Boundaries protected everyone involved. At home, mine had worn thin from overuse, stretched by years of compromise. Still, silence felt safer than confrontation. My kids deserved calm dinners, not raised voices. I told myself endurance was strength, that holding the line meant absorbing the impact. When the evening came to an end, I grabbed my coat and keys without saying much. The garage door lifted. Cold air rushed in. I sat in the driver's seat longer than necessary, hands resting on the wheel. For the first time, a thought formed clearly enough to stay. This wasn't patience anymore. The engine turned over, and I pulled out onto the street, letting the quiet fill the car while traffic lights changed ahead, one after another, and my mind stayed fixed on everything I hadn't said yet. The tension didn't stay inside the house. It rarely does. By Monday, it had found other mouths. My phone buzzed during a break between meetings. My sister-in-law's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. A voicemail followed, friendly on the surface, careful underneath. She mentioned stress, travel fatigue, how hard it must be for my wife to manage everything on her own sometimes. The message ended with a gentle suggestion to be patient. At work, the shift was quieter but just as noticeable. A colleague asked if I'd be flexible with a deadline. Another joked that I looked distracted. No accusations, no confrontation, just a series of nudges, all pointing in the same direction. Let it go. Be understanding. You're strong enough to carry it. I'd heard those lines my whole life. During lunch, I sat at my desk instead of heading out. The inbox filled and emptied. Numbers changed. Decisions got made. In that space, control still existed. Outside of it, things blurred. That afternoon, my wife texted me from the airport. "Boarding soon. Kids good?" "They're fine," I replied. A second message came through almost immediately. "Thank you for being easy about all this." Easy. That word stuck longer than it should have. At home, the kids moved through their routines without noticing much difference. Dinner got reheated. Homework spread across the table. Laughter came easily, the way it always had. Watching them, I felt the familiar pull to keep everything smooth, to absorb whatever friction existed so they wouldn't have to. Later, after they went to bed, I stood alone in the hallway. The house felt functional, not warm, like a place where things happened, not where they were decided together. The next morning, a meeting ran long. As people filtered out, Marcus lingered near the door. We'd worked together for years. Logistics, operations, the kind of job where problems didn't care about feelings. "You got a minute?" he asked. We walked down the hall without much direction. He didn't rush the question. "You okay?" "Fine," I said. The word came out on reflex. Marcus nodded once, like he'd expected that answer. "You don't look fine," he said. "You look like you're holding something that isn't yours alone." I didn't respond. Silence had become second nature. "Listen," he continued, keeping his voice even. "This isn't advice, just something to think about." He stopped walking and faced me. "If your son were grown and living the way you are right now, would you tell him to stay quiet?" The hallway felt narrower than before. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. "You don't have to answer," Marcus said. "Just don't ignore the question." He left it there and walked away. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Conversations overlapped, tasks got done. That question followed me through all of it, settling in places I hadn't guarded well. On the drive home, traffic slowed near the river. Brake lights flared and faded. I thought about how often I'd chosen restraint over clarity, how often people mistook endurance for consent. Family pressure didn't come from cruelty, it came from habit. Everyone had learned that I'd pick up what was dropped, smooth what was rough, pay what was due. Silence had trained them well. That night, I scrolled through messages I hadn't answered, well-meaning check-ins, casual jokes, nothing openly hostile. All of it pointed toward the same expectation. Hold steady, don't rock things, you'll manage. I set the phone down and sat there longer than planned. The house remained quiet. Somewhere in Atlanta, my wife was finishing her first day. Somewhere closer, my kids slept without worry. And somewhere between all of that, I realized how alone silence could make a person feel when everyone else had gotten comfortable with it. The call came while I was waiting for coffee near the office. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number, out of state. "Is this Daniel?" a man asked. I said yes, already preparing to end it. "I'm sorry to bother you," he continued. "I work security at a hotel in Atlanta. I think you should know something." My hand tightened around the phone. The line stayed quiet for a second, long enough for me to wonder if this was a mistake. "Your wife checked in last night," he said, "but she wasn't alone." I stared at the floor. People passed by with their cups and phones, unaware of anything shifting. "I'm not calling to accuse," he added quickly. "I just recognized your name. You stayed here before, a while back." I didn't ask questions right away. Words felt unreliable. Instead, I thanked him and ended the call. The coffee had gone cold by the time I remembered it was there. For the rest of the morning, doubt followed me everywhere. Not doubt about her, doubt about myself. About whether I'd let suspicion grow into something uglier than truth. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe I was reading into things. Maybe this was what stress sounded like when it wanted answers. At lunch, I checked the shared calendar again. Her meetings looked full. Names I didn't recognize. Locations listed vaguely. Client site, off-site review. Nothing that could be verified easily. I tried calling her that evening. It rang once, then went to voicemail. "In meetings," she texted a few minutes later. "Long day." Later that night, I logged into our bank account. Access denied. I tried again, same result. A new notification followed. Security settings updated. I hadn't done that. When I asked about it the next morning, her response came fast. "I tightened things up," she said. "Too many eyes on our finances." "Mine included?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "This isn't the time to make things difficult," she said finally. Difficult. That word again. Always assigned to me the moment I wanted clarity. The next few days unfolded with small but deliberate changes. Mail stopped arriving at the house. Documents I knew existed couldn't be found. A folder in the office I'd used for years suddenly required additional authorization. None of it dramatic, all of it effective. I started writing things down. Dates, times, messages that didn't align. Screenshots saved to a personal drive. Nothing illegal, nothing confrontational, just records. Quiet resistance. At night, after the kids went to bed, I sat at the table and reviewed what I had. Patterns emerged slowly, too slowly to be coincidence. Trips that overlapped, expenses that didn't match itineraries, decisions made in my name without my knowledge. The marriage I thought I was part of felt more like a structure I'd been financing without access to the blueprints. One evening, while looking for a school document, I opened a drawer in her desk. Inside sat a stack of papers I hadn't seen before. Contracts, agreements. My signature appeared more than once. Not forged, just applied earlier than I remembered. I closed the drawer carefully. Anger didn't come right away. Something heavier took its place. The realization that trust, once bent enough times, doesn't snap loudly. It frays, quietly. Until one day you pull on it and it doesn't hold. That night, she called from Atlanta. "You've been distant," she said. "I've been paying attention," I replied. Silence followed. Not confusion, calculation. "You're overthinking," she said. "You always do when things aren't centered on you." That sentence landed differently than she intended. It clarified more than it hurt. After we hung up, I sat there with my notes spread out, phone face down. The order I'd depended on for years no longer made sense. Rules had changed without notice. Access had been revoked without discussion. I added another line to the page. Date, time, her words. Then I closed the notebook, slid it into a drawer of my own, and turned off the light, already sorting through what I needed to check next. She didn't warn me. The email arrived just after noon, flagged high priority. Subject line, emergency review, Atlanta. It included names I recognized from our professional circle and a location downtown. No explanation, no context, just an expectation that I'd show up. I booked the flight within the hour. Atlanta greeted me with the kind of forced politeness that large cities perfect. I went straight from the airport to the meeting space, jacket still creased from travel. Faces turned when I walked in. A few nodded, others avoided eye contact. My wife stood near the front, composed, already mid-conversation. She didn't stop talking when she noticed me. Instead, she continued, voice steady, posture relaxed, like everything unfolding had been planned weeks in advance. "Good," she said when she finally addressed me. "You're here." No welcome, no greeting, just a role assigned. The room settled into its seats. I took mine without comment. Papers were distributed, charts appeared. My name came up more than once, always tied to decisions I hadn't made. She spoke clearly, confidently, explained timelines, reframed responsibilities. When questions surfaced, she answered them with a familiarity that suggested authority. One man leaned forward. "So Daniel signed off on this structure?" All eyes turned. I met his gaze. "I signed a different version," I said. "That one didn't include these terms." A pause followed. Not long enough to break the meeting, just long enough to register. She stepped in smoothly. "We revised it after legal review," she said. Time was a factor. Time again. Always time. I didn't argue. Not there. Not then. Clarification could wait. Public correction would only feed whatever narrative she'd already laid out. The meeting moved on. Decisions were made. I watched carefully, noting who deferred to her, who hesitated, who kept their distance from me. Dynamics shifted in real time. Afterward, people filtered out in pairs. Some offered brief nods. Others pretended to check their phones. A few avoided me entirely. In the hallway, she caught up. "You handled that well," she said, like she was grading performance. "I wasn't sure you would." "You set me up," I replied. She smiled slightly. "I put things where they needed to be." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't improvisation, it was execution. The fallout started before I made it back to the hotel. A call from finance, a question about asset exposure, another from a partner asking for reassurance. None of them hostile, all of them cautious. By evening, access to one of our shared investment accounts had been frozen pending review. A protective measure, they said. Temporary, necessary. I called the number listed, got redirected twice, left a message. Dinner went untouched. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through emails that grew shorter with each reply. Support didn't disappear all at once. It thinned, like air at altitude. Later she texted, "This is bigger than us," she wrote. "Don't make it personal." Personal. As if names on documents were interchangeable. Back in Chicago, the shift continued. Meetings postponed. A board member asked to circle back later. Marcus checked in without pressing. "Things feel off," he said. "You want me to look at anything?" "Not yet," I replied. I needed to see how far this would go. The next notice arrived 2 days later. A formal review of my role. Routine language, standard process, the kind that hides sharp edges under neutral tone. Sitting alone in my office, I leaned back and let the weight settle. Defense had limits, so did patience. I opened my notebook and added another entry, careful with the wording, precise with the timing, already calculating what couldn't be protected by silence anymore. The message arrived after midnight. No name, no greeting, just a short paragraph and an attachment. It referenced an account I recognized, one I hadn't checked in months because it was supposed to sit untouched. The note suggested I look closely at transfers tied to my wife's consulting work, then ended with a sentence that stayed with me longer than the rest. "You've been carrying more than you know." Sleep didn't come after that. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, scrolling through statements that told a clearer story than any conversation we'd had in years. Amounts moved in patterns, dates lined up too neatly with trips and meetings. What looked like support from the outside read more like extraction once the numbers spoke for themselves. As I followed the trail, something older stirred. Memories I'd kept filed away because they were inconvenient. Her parents asking me to co-sign early on, promising it was temporary. Her brother's short-term loan that never came back. The way questions about money always turned into discussions about trust and loyalty. I'd accepted all of it because that's what stability looked like to me back then. If everyone was calm, the cost felt justified. Marcus noticed the change before I said anything. "You're quieter than usual," he said during a walk between buildings. "That usually means you've already decided something." I told him about the message, about the accounts, about how long this might have been happening without me naming it. He listened without interrupting. "This isn't about her seeing someone else," he said once I finished. "That hurts, sure. But this is infrastructure. It's built to run without you noticing." The word landed hard. "So what do I do?" I asked. "You stop asking how to keep it calm," he replied. "You start asking who benefits from your silence." The answer came too quickly. That same week, I felt the walls close in further. A colleague I'd mentored asked to be reassigned. A family friend canceled dinner plans. My wife's version of events moved faster than mine because she was telling it louder. Everywhere I turned, the implication stayed the same. If I pushed back, I'd be the problem. If I held my ground, I'd be labeled difficult. If I stayed quiet, things might settle. Safety had a shape. It looked like letting this pass, like accepting a smaller role and fewer questions, like keeping access to my kids uninterrupted and my name out of legal documents. Control demanded something else entirely. One evening, while helping my daughter study, she looked up and asked a simple question. "Why do you always say yes when you don't mean it?" I paused, pencil hovering over the page. "I don't," I said automatically. She shrugged. "You do with Mom." Kids notice patterns long before adults admit them. After she went to bed, I stood alone in the living room, phone in hand, weighing what silence had already cost me. The anonymous message sat open again. This time I saved the attachment somewhere secure. A new text came in from my wife. "People are asking questions," she wrote. "We need to present a united front." United. Another word that had shifted meaning. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened my notebook and reviewed what I had collected so far. Dates, transfers, agreements, not accusations, evidence. The choice stopped feeling abstract then. Staying quiet wouldn't preserve anything worth keeping. It would only delay the moment when someone else decided for me. I closed the notebook and stood up, already planning who I needed to speak to next, and which doors had to be opened carefully, knowing once they were, there wouldn't be a way to return to the version of things that passed for safe. The attorney's office sat a few blocks from my own, close enough to reach on foot without raising questions. I didn't schedule the meeting through my assistant, used a personal phone, paid the retainer myself. She listened more than she spoke. That helped. I laid everything out in the order it had happened, not the order it hurt. Dates first, then documents, then the parts that didn't make sense until they did. She didn't interrupt when my voice flattened, or when I paused to find the right word. When I finished, she closed the folder slowly. "You're not late," she said, "but you are close to the edge of what can still be controlled." That was enough. From then on, every move stayed deliberate. No rushing, no emotional decisions disguised as urgency. I built timelines instead of arguments, cross-checked statements against records, compared versions without reacting to them. At work, I kept my schedule intact. Meetings ran on time, reports went out as expected. The fewer ripples I caused, the less attention I drew. Familiarity became camouflage. Evenings turned quieter. After the kids went to bed, I worked through files with the patience of someone assembling furniture without instructions. Piece by piece, no forcing anything into place. What I found wasn't dramatic. That almost made it worse. Transfers routed through third parties. Amendments signed under the guise of speed. Liability shifted incrementally, never enough at once to trigger alarms. It was careful, professional, designed to exhaust anyone who tried to trace it. I understood the architecture now. Strangely, the anger faded. Focus replaced it. Clarity did that. Once the shape of the problem revealed itself, emotion lost its grip. Small signs suggested I wasn't as invisible as I'd hoped. An email arrived one afternoon from an address I didn't recognize. No subject. One line in the body. "Be careful who you trust." I deleted it without responding, saved a copy elsewhere. At the gym, a man I'd never seen before held eye contact a second too long before turning away. Could have meant nothing. I logged the time anyway. A text from my wife came later that night. "You've been distant. No accusation, no concern, just observation." "Busy," I replied. That was true, in the most literal sense. I moved certain documents out of the house, changed passwords quietly, opened a separate account under my name only, starting small to avoid notice. Each step felt less like secrecy and more like balance being restored. Marcus checked in again near the end of the week. "You look settled," he said. "That usually means trouble's coming." "It's already here," I told him. "I'm just meeting it on my terms." He didn't ask more. Trust worked both ways. The next message came through late Sunday night, this one direct. "We need to talk," my wife wrote. "There are rumors." I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Rumors meant someone had noticed shifts or sensed resistance. "Tomorrow," I replied, "after work." She didn't answer. I packed my bag for Monday with extra care, slid the notebook into a side pocket, keys in their usual place, jacket pressed. Nothing about the morning routine changed. That mattered. On the drive in, traffic slowed near the same stretch of road where I'd sat weeks earlier, wondering how much silence could cost. The answer had grown clearer since then. Whatever was coming wouldn't be loud at first. It never was. Pressure built quietly, behind closed doors, through conversations framed as concern. I parked, cut the engine, and stayed seated a moment longer than usual, reviewing the list of calls I needed to make before the day ended, already adjusting it when a new notification appeared on my phone, one I didn't recognize, arriving sooner than expected. The call came from the school while I was reviewing a contract addendum. Not an emergency, they said, just a concern. By the time I arrived, my wife was already there. She sat across from the counselor with her hands folded, calm in a way that suggested rehearsal. I took the empty chair without greeting anyone. The air between us felt procedural, not personal. "We've noticed some tension at home," the counselor said. "Your son mentioned arguments." I hadn't argued. I had withdrawn. The difference didn't matter in that room. My wife spoke before I could. "Daniel's been under a lot of pressure," she said. "Work issues, travel. I think it's affecting his patience." The word patience carried weight. It implied absence, instability. I kept my voice even. "Our kids are safe," I said. "They're cared for." The counselor nodded, but her eyes lingered. Notes were taken. By the time the meeting ended, nothing had been decided. That was the point. Doubt had been introduced, records updated, a seed planted. The next blow landed before I reached the car, a voicemail from my attorney. "We need to talk today," she said. "There's been a filing." I didn't ask for details. I already knew. Back at the office, an email waited from HR. "Administrative leave pending review." "Temporary," it said. Neutral language again. "Protective measure." My phone buzzed non-stop. Family members, mutual friends, questions wrapped in concern, all circling the same idea. What was going on with me? At home that evening, my wife moved through the house with purpose, packing a small bag. "The kids will stay with my sister tonight," she said. "They need stability." "They need their father," I replied. She didn't slow down. "They need peace." Peace. Another word that had been repurposed. Fear hit then, sharp and physical. Not of losing her, of losing them. Images rose uninvited. Empty rooms, missed milestones. A life narrowed by someone else's version of events. That old guilt surfaced. The kind that comes from believing it's your job to absorb damage so others don't have to. My father's voice echoed faintly, telling me to stay calm, stay quiet, stay useful. I stood there while she zipped the bag. "You're doing this to yourself," she said without looking up. "If you'd just cooperate." Cooperate meant surrender. It always had. The attorney called again. This time I answered. "She's alleging financial misconduct," she said. "Nothing proven, but enough to complicate things if you don't respond." "And the kids?" I asked. A pause. "That's where it gets messy." The house felt smaller after that. Walls closer, options fewer. I went outside and sat on the steps, phone in hand, breathing through the noise in my head. For a moment, giving in seemed tempting. Agreeing to terms I hadn't set. Letting professionals smooth it over. Safety whispered its offer again. Then I thought about my daughter asking why I said yes when I didn't mean it. About my son watching more than he spoke. About the lessons silence was teaching them. Inside, a drawer slid shut. She was almost done packing. I stood and went back in. "They're not leaving," I said. She froze. "Excuse me?" "Not like this," I continued. "Not without a plan we both agree to." Her eyes narrowed, surprised more than angry. "You don't have a choice." I felt it then. The moment something broke cleanly instead of bending again. "I do," I said, "and I'm using it." No shouting followed. No dramatic exchange. Just a shift in posture, in expectation. She stepped back, phone already in hand. I walked past her to the kitchen table, opened my notebook, and reviewed the list I'd been avoiding until now, already dialing the first number on it while she watched, realizing the ground under both of us was no longer moving in only one direction. The envelope arrived without warning, slipped under the door sometime between school drop-off and my first call of the day. No return address, just my name, handwritten, careful. Inside sat copies of documents I'd never seen before but recognized instantly. Vendor agreements tied to the Atlanta trips, an internal memo stamped confidential, a payment schedule that filled in gaps I hadn't been able to close on my own. One page had a note attached. "I was there when this was signed. You weren't supposed to know." The handwriting wasn't hers. I didn't call the number listed at the bottom right away. Read everything twice instead. Compared dates. Cross-referenced amounts. The pattern sharpened. What looked like scattered decisions now aligned into a straight line. This wasn't chaos. It was appetite. Midday brought the counterattack. A message from my wife appeared on my phone, followed by another, then another. Screenshots circulated in a group thread I hadn't been invited to. Selective excerpts. Partial timelines. a version of events that painted concern as aggression and silence as guilt. By the afternoon, a mutual friend reached out. "People are worried," she said carefully. "You're not denying much." "I'm not explaining yet," I replied. That distinction mattered. At the office, someone forwarded a post I hadn't seen. My name appeared without detail, framed as a question mark. Enough to stir speculation, not enough to challenge directly. Surface-level advantage still belonged to her. I finally called the number from the envelope that evening. A woman answered, voice low, cautious. She'd worked adjacent to my wife's consulting group. Not close enough to be loyal, not distant enough to stay unaware. She described meetings I hadn't attended, decisions labeled urgent to bypass review, how my signature was treated as a resource rather than a responsibility. She said you were fine with it, the woman added, that you trusted her completely. Trust had been repurposed too. After the call ended, I sat with the papers spread across the table, marking connections with a pen that barely moved. No emotion surged this time, just alignment. The weakness wasn't secrecy, it was excess. She hadn't known when to stop. I forwarded copies to my attorney with a short note, then another to a secure folder Marcus had helped me set up earlier in the week. Redundancy mattered now. That night, my wife confronted me in the hallway. "You're letting this get out of hand," she said. "People think you're unstable. People think what they're told," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "You're trying to ruin me." "I'm trying to understand what I'm responsible for," I said. "There's a difference." She laughed, sharp and brief. "You don't have the leverage you think you do. Maybe not publicly. Not yet." Later, after the kids went to bed, I organized everything into a single timeline. No commentary, no interpretation, just facts arranged in sequence. The story told itself when left alone. Calls went out quietly, not to confront, to verify. Each answer added weight. The final piece clicked into place just before midnight. A transfer routed through an account I'd assumed was dormant, one she'd mentioned years ago as a backup. I pulled the record and stared at it longer than necessary. There it was, the excess, the mark she couldn't erase. I closed the file and leaned back, letting the day settle. She still controlled the noise, still shaped the immediate narrative. That wouldn't last. I gathered the documents into a folder, labeled it with the date, and slid it into my bag. Tomorrow would require precision. No speeches, no emotion, just placement. Upstairs, a door creaked as she moved from one room to another, already planning her next step. I turned off the light at the table, picked up my keys, and checked the time, mentally adjusting the morning schedule to make room for one more meeting that needed to happen before anyone else could move first. The conference room filled faster than I expected. Lawyers on both sides, a mediator, 2 representatives from the firm. My wife sat across the table, posture relaxed, expression steady. She looked prepared to perform, not to answer. I took the seat beside my attorney and placed the folder in front of me without opening it. The mediator began with formalities, purpose, process, ground rules. Everyone nodded along, already thinking several steps ahead. My wife spoke first. "I want to resolve this quickly," she said. "For the children, for everyone involved." The phrasing sounded familiar, public-facing, safe. Her attorney followed, outlining concerns about my conduct, financial irregularities, emotional instability, a pattern of behavior that, on paper, looked convincing enough to slow things down. I listened without reacting, took notes, let them finish. When it was my turn, I didn't argue point by point, didn't defend my character. I slid the folder across the table. "This is a timeline," I said. "No commentary, just records." The mediator glanced down. So did the attorneys. Pages turned, pens paused. My wife leaned forward slightly. "That's not the full context," she said. "He's cherry-picking. Everything in there is verifiable," my attorney replied. "We can pause if anyone wants to check." No one asked to pause. As the room worked through the documents, the temperature shifted. Transfers appeared alongside meeting dates. Amendments aligned with trips. Liability traced back to decisions made without disclosure. My wife's lawyer tried to redirect. "Even if some of this occurred," he said, "intent hasn't been established. Intent isn't required for accountability," my attorney answered. "Impact is." That was the first crack. My wife spoke again, sharper this time. "You're trying to make me look like a criminal." "I'm trying to clarify what I'm responsible for," I said. "That's all." She stared at me, searching for hesitation. Found none. Then came the move she'd been saving. "If this continues," she said, "I'll pursue sole custody. I won't expose the kids to this." The room went still. That old fear surfaced, the one she'd relied on for years. The idea that I'd fold to protect them. I opened the folder again and removed a single page. "Before you do that," I said, "you should read this." It was the dormant account, the one she'd forgotten about, the excess she couldn't explain away. Her attorney reached for it first, read silently, then again, slower. "This needs a moment," he said, voice tight. The mediator nodded. A break was called. Outside the room, my wife paced, phone in hand. Her confidence had shifted into urgency, control slipping. She approached me near the water fountain. "We can fix this," she said quietly. "You don't have to go this far." "I didn't," I replied. "You did." Her jaw set. No tears, no apology, just calculation. Back inside, the tone had changed. Questions followed, not accusations, clarifications, the kind that narrowed options instead of expanding them. By the end, her side requested time. The leverage she'd counted on no longer belonged to her alone. As people gathered their things, the mediator thanked everyone for their cooperation. My wife avoided my eyes. I stood, straightened my jacket, and collected the folder. No speeches followed, no final words exchanged. I walked out of the room, past the reception desk, into the hallway where the noise dropped away. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, alone. As it descended, my phone buzzed once. A message from my attorney confirming next steps. Another from Marcus, asking how it went. I replied to neither. The doors slid open at street level, and I stepped forward, already moving through the rest of the day, with the quiet certainty that the ground had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. Paperwork replaced arguments. That was how the last stretch unfolded. Forms signed, dates confirmed, custody schedules outlined with the kind of neutrality that leaves no room for interpretation. My attorney handled most of it. I reviewed, asked questions, made decisions without rushing. At home, the house adjusted slowly. Some drawers emptied, a few shelves stayed bare. The kids moved between rooms with the quiet adaptability they'd learned from watching adults avoid conflict. Mornings became simpler. Evenings followed a steadier rhythm. Fear didn't disappear all at once. It surfaced in small ways. A hesitation before turning off the lights. A pause before locking the door. That old instinct to scan for what might fall apart next still lingered. I noticed it for what it was. A habit formed from years of believing my value came from holding everything together. One afternoon, while waiting outside the school, I watched my son talk animatedly to a friend. He laughed without checking who was listening. No calculation, no caution, just presence. That loosened something I hadn't realized was still tight. The legal consequences moved on their own timeline. Accounts remained frozen. Investigations continued quietly. My wife's consulting contracts dissolved one by one. Invitations stopped coming. People who once returned her calls immediately grew unavailable. She reached out once through her attorney, not to apologize, to negotiate. I declined. No response followed after that. At work, administrative leave ended. Not with fanfare. Just an email confirming my position would continue under revised oversight. A few colleagues avoided the subject. Others nodded in passing, unsure what to say. Marcus stopped by later that week. "You look different," he said. "Lighter," I replied. He smiled briefly and left it there. The kids settled into the new routine faster than I expected. Dinner conversations returned to school projects and weekend plans. Their questions grew less cautious. They stopped watching my face for cues before speaking. One night, my daughter asked if things were finished. "They're clear," I said. She seemed satisfied with that. I packed the last of my wife's remaining belongings into a box and left it by the door. Arrangements had already been made for pickup. No note, no message. When the box disappeared a few days later, the house felt unchanged. That surprised me. I spent the following weekend organizing things I'd ignored for years. Old files, worn jackets, a stack of notebooks filled with plans that belonged to a version of myself who thought sacrifice was the same as love. Those pages went into the recycling bin without ceremony. That evening, after the kids went to bed, I sat at the table where so much of this had been pieced together. The surface was clear now. No folders, No timelines, just a lamp and a glass of water. Silence settled without weight. I thought about how often I'd confused endurance with integrity. How easily responsibility could turn into permission for others to cross lines. How much energy it took to stay quiet when clarity demanded sound. The front door clicked as I locked it for the night. Lights went out room by room. Upstairs, I paused outside the kids' doors, listening to the steady quiet of sleep. In my bedroom, I set the alarm for the morning, placed my phone face down, and turned off the lamp. The house held. Nothing needed fixing. I lay back, letting the stillness do what it did best, already moving into the next day without checking over my shoulder, the thought of what came next forming slowly and without urgency as sleep took over.